Just 1 second. Let's set up my audio here. Just 1 more second. Sorry. Start here. All right. So this is a reading hour special edition. Today I'm going to read the report on human rights violations in the United States in 2024. This is from the State Council Information Office of the People's Republic of China. Came out yesterday, August 17th, 2025. So this is a special one. I did this before on my old podcast, on the Turn Leftist podcast. I think we did it as a live episode of some kind, but we read the one that they did on the year 2023. So it's been another year. Seems that's what they do. They do the report on the previous year. So we have the foreword, American Democracy, Carnival of Money Power Games is Section 1. Section 2 is Social Welfare, Struggling Low-Incomers. Section 3 is Racism, Shackles of Minorities. Section 4 is Vulnerable Groups, Helplessness of Women and Children. 5 is Fatal Journey, Elegy of Undocumented Immigrants. And 6 is American Hegemony, Terminator of Other Countries' Human Rights. And then the conclusion. So it's 26 pages, so I'm just going to read through all this. If it takes me more than an hour or less than an hour, whatever. So today is nominally a reading hour, but it's the special edition. So the foreword. 2024, as an election year in the United States, was a year of special concern that features aggravating political strife and social divide. Such a landscape offers an opportunity to review the state of human rights in the country in an intensive manner. Economic and social inequalities in the United States worsened with the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. Inflation delivered a devastating blow to middle and low income families. Over 40 million Americans lived in poverty, and more than 700,000 people were homeless. Meanwhile, 13.5% of U.S. households faced food insecurity, and 13.8 million children lived in families that did not have enough food on the table. Drug overdose claimed over 100,000 lives, while the exorbitant and inefficient healthcare and insurance systems fueled widespread public outrage. The death toll from gun violence remained high. More than 1,400 children died of gunshots, and over 1,300 people perished due to police brutality. So again, this is just in the year 2024. Keep in mind. Vulnerable groups were trapped in dire straits with their rights being constantly violated. The American Indian boarding schools, which operated for over a century and a half, turned out to be hell with the discovery of deaths of more than 3,100 Native American children in them. I love how, just like, I don't know what the word even is. It's just like China does not pull any punches, even in like their official literature that they're publishing, like from their government offices. Like this is they're not masking anything. They're not beating around the bush at all. Systemic racism was deeply entrenched in law enforcement and all aspects of life. African Americans were 3 times more likely to be shot dead by police than whites, and 61% of all children sentenced to life imprisonment without parole were of African descent. Nearly 40% of women experienced sexual harassment at some point in their careers, while domestic violence rates exceeded 40% in 11 states. Some 5 million women lived in areas with no obstetric services. The number of illegally employed children surged to its highest level in decades. Yet the authorities loosened regulation to allow the exploitation of child laborers. Deaths among migrants on the southern border continued to climb, with fatalities in the El Paso region of Texas skyrocketing from 72 in 2022 to 168 in 2024. Many immigration detention centers became secret sites of torture. Now, again, this is all still under the Biden presidency. This is all still for the year 2024, before Trump even came into office. As for the numerous human rights issues in the United States, politicians from both parties equivocated during election campaigns and dodged the question of how to earnestly fix the problems. On social and livelihood issues, politicians beat around the bush, putting the interests of a privileged few above the well-being of the many. By exploiting racial and gender divides, they covered up structural problems in society by instigating antagonism between rival groups. They attacked each other over immigration and tried every way to capture attention and garner votes, with many of them demonizing immigrants. With dazzling political maneuvering, the rights of American people were reduced to mere tools for politicians to seize power. U.S. domestic political strife had spillover effects, intensifying regional conflicts and leading to humanitarian disasters. The escalation of the Israel Palestine conflict resulted in over 100,000 casualties and displaced approximately 90% of Gaza's population. The unilateral sanctions imposed randomly by the United States and adversely affected billions of people globally, with more than 60% of low income countries bearing the brunt of these economic penalties. Despite 32 consecutive resolutions passed overwhelmingly by the UN General Assembly, the United States persisted in maintaining its economic, commercial, and financial embargo against Cuba. The torture apparatus at the Guantanamo Bay prison continued to operate, employing methods that were nothing short of appalling. Yeah. Good morning there, Shibbles. How's it going? Hey, frustrated marsupial. Good to see you in the chat. Yeah, so again, this is the Reading Hour Special Edition, the report on human rights violations in the United States in 2024 by the State Council Information Office of the People's Republic of China. Came out yesterday, so special edition here today. But again, it's just great. China doesn't pull any punches. They are flat out with all of it. Yeah, they are not beating around the bush. Section 1, that was the foreword. This section 1 is American Democracy, Carnival of Money Power Games. The year 2024 was meant to be a defining moment for American citizens to exercise their political rights. Yet in reality, the year was fraught with political violence, as politics was controlled by money, justice was hijacked by politics, and voters were disenfranchised by electoral rules. As a result, the majority of Americans were profoundly disillusioned with American-style democracy. Money controls U.S. politics. Money is the lifeblood of U.S. politics. And the electoral process is precisely where money comes in to exercise control. According to data of Open Secrets, a research group tracking money in U.S. politics, over 15.9 billion U.S. dollars was spent during the 2024 federal election cycle, another record high. Of the total campaign funds, more than $7.7 billion came from super political action committees, or PACs, while nearly $1.4 billion came from more uncontrollable hybrid PACs. These committees are in a gray area that cannot be effectively regulated by current campaign laws in the United States, directly paving the way for money controlling politics. Again, like what political party is talking about that? Neither. The manipulators behind big money politics are in fact financiers who seek to maximize their own interests. These people willfully control the basic principles and actual operation of American politics through money. During the 2024 elections, at least 135 billionaires publicly endorsed presidential candidates from both major parties. Public data has revealed that the maximum amount of donations from a single donor received by presidential candidates of both parties during the campaign exceeded $100 million, dwarfing previous, quote, big numbers of tens of millions of dollars. So yeah, this was a standout election cycle in even the amounts of single donor donations. An opinion piece by columnist Belen Fernandez, published on Al Jazeera website on July 10th, 2024, said, quote, "In short, it is just another reminder of the inordinate power and influence wielded by America's donor class in a shameless plutocracy, euphemized as, quote, democracy. Plutocratic operations have become so normalized a part of the political landscape," she wrote. "At the end of the day, the United States is nothing but a government of the donors, by the donors, for the donors." Yeah, once again, dead on. It's crazy how when you read like Global South News, they actually have a much better handle on American politics from the outside than people who are under the ideology and under the indoctrination spell. Yeah, people are popping off in the chat. I'm going to let's see. I'll just display the chat for everybody. So, an opinion piece by sorry, I read that one. Gerrymandering manipulates public will. The two major political parties in the United States blatantly put partisan interests above voter rights by meticulously crafting voter structures in their favor through extreme gerrymandering. Following the 2020 census, both parties pushed for radical redistricting for political gains, significantly impacting the outcomes of congressional elections. Gerrymandering, driven by partisan interests, has also led to judicial disputes. As of September 30th, 2024, a total of 84 lawsuits were filed around the country over gerrymandering. The majority of complaints demanded the revision of district maps initially drawn under the control of a single political party. Of the cases, 48 were related to accusations of racial discrimination. In May 2024, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a 6-3 decision to nullify a lower court ruling that found South Carolina's redrawing of congressional maps discriminated against Black voters. The Supreme Court decision, in fact, backed political action that suppressed voters. The three dissenting Supreme Court justices warned the ruling had devastating implications. Justice Elena Kagan wrote, quote, In the electoral sphere, especially where ugly patterns of pervasive racial discrimination have so long governed, we should demand better of ourselves, of our political representatives, and most of all, of this court. So, yeah, is that one of those times when, like, the dissenting Supreme Court justices just write a scathing critique and then it doesn't actually do anything, of course? It's like the best liberalism. I love it. Election rules suppress voter rights. According to a report published on December 1st, 2024, by the Southern Poverty Law Center, 24 states have passed voter suppression laws, while 17 states have passed new or stricter voter ID laws since 2020. These laws impose overly burdensome restrictions on voter identification and voting by mail, disproportionately affecting seniors, minorities, people with disabilities, low income voters, and students. And I just heard today, I saw a headline that, like, Trump is trying to do away with mail in voting entirely. According to Vote Riders research, people of color in the United States were nearly 4 times more likely than white citizens to lack the required identification for voting. Many eligible voters, regardless of political affiliation, were unable to vote due to a lack of understanding their state's voter identification laws. A Brennan Center for Justice report published on November 19th, 2024, revealed that historically Native Americans had the lowest voter turnout among all groups. Yet the US government had consistently failed to improve their voting conditions, leading to widespread disenfranchisement. Extreme incidents of political violence occurred frequently. The prolonged partisan gridlock fueled a culture of political obstruction, often leading to political violence against individuals. Politicians from both parties continued to incite hatred and animosity, triggering radical behaviors. Quote, threats of violence become the new normal for politicians. I wonder what they're going to say about the attempts on Trump's life. As reported by Reuters on October 21st, 2024, since the Capitol riot on January 6, 2021, over 300 incidents of political violence had occurred in the United States. During the 2024 election, both the Democratic and Republican presidential candidates and their teams faced varying degrees of political violence. On July 13th and September 15th, 2024, Trump survived 2 assassination attempts. On September 23rd, 2024, a shooting occurred at a Democratic campaign office in the state of Arizona. Around Thanksgiving, November 28th, 2024, multiple Democratic members of Congress and Trump nominated cabinet and federal officials received bomb threats. The public was deeply disillusioned with American style democracy. According to a New York Times and Siena College poll published on October 28th, 2024, nearly half of voters expressed skepticism about the effectiveness of the U.S. political system, with 62% believing the government primarily served the elite rather than ordinary citizens. I mean, those 62% of people are not wrong. Very funny. Pew Research Center data showed that 41% of Americans believed that, quote, the American dream was no longer attainable, and 60% of young people aged 18 to 29 thought it was either unachievable or never existed. In an article published on November 6, 2024, Tyler Austin Harper, a scholar at Bates College, stated, quote, a political system like that is fundamentally broken, with both parties representing special interest groups and, quote, often without even pretending to heed the needs of voters. A vast majority of voters believed the United States was on the wrong track, and nearly 80% said the election had not made them proud of their country. Yeah, I mean, this actually makes Americans seem more socially and culturally aware, politically aware. Section 2, social welfare, struggling low incomers. Skyrocketing inflation exacerbated the wealth gap, delivering catastrophic blows to low and middle income families, while homelessness reached unprecedented levels. The costly and inefficient healthcare and insurance systems sparked widespread outrage. Substance abuse continued to harm public health. Gun violence threatened lives. Police brutality persisted in total disregard for human lives. Prisoners continued to be abused in detention facilities. The wealth gap revealed, quote, two Americas. Income and wealth inequality in the United States far exceeded those of other developed nations and continued to worsen. Data released by Statista on September 16, 2024, showed that the U.S. poverty rate rose again in 2023, with 12.9% of the population living in poverty. According to Federal Reserve data, as of June 30th, 2024, the top 10% of U.S. households held 67% of the nation's total wealth, while the bottom 50% owned just 2.5%. The average wealth of the top 10% was 1,353 times higher than that of the bottom 50%. Yeah, these are like staggering numbers. And this is that like same kind of thing that like I have been seeing for the entirety of my politically aware life, where you see that chart and it shows like what Americans think the wealth distribution is and then what it actually is. And it's like this crazy exaggerated inversion of the wealth. It's like it's wild. Anyway, educational inequality perpetuated intergenerational poverty, creating a vicious cycle. For example, the wealth of families where parents lacked a high school diploma was only 9% of that of families where parents had a 4-year college degree. The wealthiest 10% of households owned approximately 80% of the stock market value. The United States had effectively split into, quote, two Americas, a small wealthy elite and a vast low and middle class majority. Low income families faced catastrophic impacts. In 2024, inflation remained high. So were consumer prices and interest rates, severely impacting ordinary Americans, many of whom saw higher debts than ever. U.S. credit card debt totaled a record high of $1.14 trillion in the second quarter of 2024. Low income families were forced to cut discretionary spending, and loan delinquency rates rose to the highest levels in nearly a decade. In 2023, 13.5% of U.S. households faced food insecurity, up from 12.8% in 2022. Some 13.8 million children lived in households that did not have enough food on the table. Homelessness pushed people to the brink. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's 2024 annual report revealed that the number of homeless people in the United States reached 771,800, or approximately 23 per 10,000 people, marking an 18.1% increase from 2023, the largest rise since records began in 2007. Which is crazy that records like that only began in 2007, right before the financial crash. And then that's still in 2022 to 2023. We're seeing the largest increase since those records began in 2007. So larger than an increase than after that financial crisis. And again, and wasn't even like really talked about that much. Because again, Biden was in power, and you were crazy if you thought that Bidenomics wasn't working for everyone. An increasing number of working Americans with decent jobs became homeless due to various factors. Compounding the crisis, the Supreme Court ruled in July 2024 to allow fines, arrests, or imprisonment against homeless individuals sleeping outdoors. Yeah, that was another ruling that kind of like got talked about for a bit, and then everybody just passed on by, just moved on. California, home to nearly half of the nation's homeless population, ordered the dismantling of homeless encampments statewide. In Los Angeles, a homeless individual was 79 times more likely than a housed person to be cited or arrested, and 27 times more likely to be jailed than those with housing. Government business collusion fueled substance abuse and drug crisis. Ann Milgram, administrator of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, said the United States was facing, quote, the most dangerous and deadly drug crisis. Overdoses involving synthetic opioids, e.g., fentanyl, and stimulants, e.g., cocaine and methamphetamine, surged in the past few years. In 2023, there were 105,007 drug overdose deaths in the United States, with the highest mortality rate among adults aged 35 to 44. Cannabis became a nationwide business, with retail sales exceeding $32 billion in 2024. According to the 2023 National Survey on Drug Use and Health, approximately 61.8 million Americans aged 12 and older used marijuana that year. Nearly 9 million Americans misuse opioids, and quote, opioids have become the narcotic of the American public. Man, that sounds prophetic. It sounds just like sounds kind of like Marx, doesn't it? Sounds like Marx saying opium, except now opium is the opium of the people. Crazy, crazy stuff. U.S. pharmaceutical giants, in pursuit of profit, deceptively promoted opioid use while employing every means to evade liability and compensation claims. The American pharmaceutical lobby has also intensified policy influence, with annual spending exceeding 200 million US dollars since 2007 and reaching a record high of nearly 400 million dollars in 2023. The US Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, failed in its oversight duties when approving and labeling new painkillers. The root of America's drug abuse and opioid crisis lies in interest hijacking, government business collusion, and regulatory failure. Yeah, again, just nail it. Not pulling any punches, not beating around the bush. Failed healthcare systems triggers failed healthcare system triggers public anger. Excessive marketization and high monopolization have driven up medical prices, while special interest groups have hijacked policymaking. Bloated administrative costs across multiple systems have jointly led to spiraling healthcare expenditures in the United States. the nation's per capita health spending surged from $7,908 in 2000 to $14,570 in 2023. Okay, so that's like average per person went from 8,000 to 15 from 2000 to 2023. The Commonwealth Fund's September 2024 report, quote, Mirror Mirror 2024, a portrait of the failing U.S. healthcare system, revealed that among 10 high income nations, the United States spends the most on healthcare, with expenditures continuing to rise, yet performs the worst. It is the only country without universal health coverage and has the lowest life expectancy. Due to exorbitant out of pocket costs and lack of primary care, among other things, 35% of American adults in 2023 either lacked adequate health coverage or had to forego treatment due to insufficient insurance benefits, while another 9% had no health insurance at all. A significant number of people are unable to access Medicare due to unaffordable basic health care costs, which forced them to sorry, was it saying Medicare to access Medicare? Due to due to unaffordable basic healthcare costs, which forced them to endure untreated illnesses throughout their lives. U.S. health insurers routinely employ tactics of, quote, delay, deny, and depose against policyholders, driving numerous low and middle income patients into medical bankruptcy. Funny that they're referencing that too. They knew what they were doing. On December 4th, yeah, here we go. On December 4th, 2024, when United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson was shot, ammunition found at the scene bore the words delay, deny, and depose, terms that epitomize insurance claim avoidance strategies. The incident reignited public fury toward U.S. health insurance companies. Yeah, very funny. I'm sure all the Luigi fans will get a kick out of that. Frequent mass shootings, yeah, speaking of, have plagued the nation. The U.S. government has failed to protect its people from the recurring violence caused by rampant gun misuse. The K-12 school shooting database website shows that school shootings and related casualties have risen sharply in recent years. Data from the Gun Violence Archive show that in 2024, there were more than 40,000 gunshot deaths in the United States, 503 mass shootings, and 45 school shootings, 32 of which occurred in elementary and secondary schools. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, Milwaukee County in the state of Wisconsin has between 10.8 and 14.6 homicide victims for every 100,000 children, with the vast majority of the victims dying from gunshots. Why is like Wisconsin so bad? In March 2024, a Pennsylvania survey found that nearly half of the parents were more worried about gun violence at school than about their children, quote, being behind academically. Yeah, I mean, I'd rather my kid get bad grades than get shot for sure. Police brutality is rampant in law enforcement. The U.S. website Mapping Police Violence shows that police officers use violence against at least 300,000 individuals annually, with approximately 100,000 sustaining injuries. Fatal police encounters have shown a consistent upward trend since 2013. In 2024 alone, police shootings claimed 1,361 lives. U.S. human rights activist Tamara Hill observed in an article, quote, violence has become institutionalized within American law enforcement culture, while systemic impunity exacerbates police brutality. Under excessively lenient accountability standards, U.S. police departments and criminal justice systems routinely harm civilians without consequence. Again, dead on. Nailing it, Tamara. Inmates face abuse in U.S. prison facilities. Accounting for less than 5% of the global population, the United States incarcerates nearly 40% of the world's prisoners. As of 2024, approximately 1.9 million individuals had been detained across American correctional facilities, which means 1 in every 176 U.S. residents is currently imprisoned. More alarmingly, at least 1/4 of released prisoners are rearrested within the first year of their freedom, within their first year of freedom. The Los Angeles Times reported on September 4th, 2024, that dozens of women incarcerated in 2 prisons have filed multiple lawsuits against the Corrections Department, alleging that prison staff sexually harassed, molested, and raped them by exploiting their positions of authority. However, prison sexual abuse data showed that despite hundreds of complaints, virtually no disciplinary actions were taken against implicated staff. The U.S. Department of Justice said Georgia prisons violated the Eighth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution by placing inmates in, quote, horrific, inhumane conditions. The United Press International reported on October 1st, 2024, on its website. So I guess that would fall under the cruel and unusual punishment. Yeah, again, none of this is surprising. None of this is news to Us anti-imperialists, Marxists, feminists, people who are like on the actual left, everyone knows how this system operates. Section 3, Racism, Shackles of Minorities. United Nations Human Rights Council's Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Racism noted that racism in the United States has been described as, quote, being in the air we breathe. Yeah, that's ideology. And persists, quote, from cradle to grave. Racist rhetoric runs rampant, while the judicial system exhibits systemic racial discrimination at every level. Ethnic minorities are subjected to persistent and widespread discrimination and exclusion in their daily life and workplaces, with environmental racism emerging as a new concern. Furthermore, racial discrimination is being entrenched and disseminated in more covert forms through artificial intelligence. Racist rhetoric has become pervasive. Inciting racial discrimination has become a key tactic in U.S. political campaigns. The National Broadcasting Company reported on October 28, 2024, that speakers at a U.S. presidential campaign rally made a series of vulgar, racially charged remarks disparaging African Americans and Latinos. I mean, not shocking at all. Of course they would. Sorry. As the 2024 presidential election concluded, many African Americans across the country received racist text messages instructing them to report to the nearest plantation to pick cotton. Jesus. One disclosed message read, quote, our executive slaves will send a brown van to pick you up. Be prepared to be searched upon entering the plantation. Wild. Wild. Yeah, I was not even aware of that. Systemic racial discrimination pervades law enforcement and judicial systems. A June 2024 report titled, quote, Bias in the Criminal Legal System, jointly released by the American Bar Association and Stanford University, found that racial bias exists at every stage of criminal proceedings, from arrest and bail to charging and sentencing. Compared with white individuals who committed similar offenses, African Americans and Latinos are more likely to be arrested by police, face longer pretrial detention, and receive harsher sentences. Racial disparities are particularly stark in cases involving minor traffic, drug, and property offenses. Racial discrimination is even more evident in instances of police use of force. Among documented cases of police force related fatalities in the United States, African Americans are killed at 3 times the rate of white Americans, Native Americans at 2.2 times the rate, and Hispanic Americans at 1.3 times. A report by the U.S. Department of Justice found that the Lexington Police Department in Mississippi has, quote, created a system where officers can relentlessly violate the law. In this rural town, where approximately 76% of residents are African Americans, alarming patterns of racially discriminatory law enforcement and harassment were identified. Another Justice Department investigation revealed that the Memphis Police Department in Tennessee engaged in excessive use of force and discriminatory treatment of African Americans, particularly affecting children. Jesus. Do they also train with the IDF? No, that's something a lot of police here do. Between January 2018 and August 2023, 180 African American children were arrested for curfew violations or loitering, compared with just 4 white children. Holy shit, 180 to 4. Similarly, 120 African American children were arrested for disorderly conduct, while only 1 white child faced the same charge. Insane. These are insane stats. A report from the Brennan Center for Justice on December 10th, 2024 highlighted racial disparities in federal sentencing, particularly in the application of the death penalty. In Texas, African Americans were found to be 16 times more likely than individuals of other racial groups to receive a death sentence in federal trials. Additionally, a report by Detroit News on February 4th, 2024 revealed that while African Americans constitute approximately 13% of the U.S. population, they account for 61% of all juveniles sentenced to life without parole. Wild. Imagine being a juvenile sentenced to life without parole. Environmental racism has far-reaching consequences. A report released by United Nations human rights experts on May 16, 2024, highlighted that in the United States, the devastating effects of the climate and ecological crises are disproportionately borne by those who face conditions of systemic inequality and racism. Organizations such as the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the American Lung Association have identified significant disparities in environmental pollution exposure across racial groups, which serve as a fundamental driver of health inequities. Due to historical factors such as racial segregation and redlining, African Americans are more likely to be exposed to hazardous or polluted environment. A report by the Kaiser Family Foundation on October 24th, 2024, noted that nearly 80% of urban solid waste incinerators in the U.S. are located in African American, Hispanic, and low income communities, contributing to elevated risks of cancer and other severe illnesses. A study published in the Environmental Research Journal in March 2024, co-authored by scholars from Tulane University, University of Memphis, and Louisiana State University, examined Louisiana's Cancer Alley, a region densely populated with chemical plants and predominantly home to African American residents. The study found that local cancer risk from industrial air pollution is the highest in the nation, more than 7 times the national average. Additionally, the health risks posed by air pollution to pregnant women and newborns in the area are 3 times higher than the national average. A survey by Gallup further revealed that environmental pollution has displaced a significant number of African Americans. Between May 2023 and April 2024 alone, approximately 4 million African Americans were forced to relocate temporarily due to pollution, while another 2 million had to move permanently. African Americans face a severe health deficit. A report released by the Kaiser Family Foundation on February 22, 2024, underscores that the persistent health and medical disparities affecting African American communities are deeply rooted in historical racial discrimination. African Americans have a life expectancy nearly 5 years shorter than that of white Americans, an infant mortality rate more than twice as high, and a maternal mortality rate nearly 3 times greater. Over the past 2 decades, the United States has made little progress in closing racial gaps in key health indicators. Federal, state, and local governments have established systems that maintain the status quo, while powerful commercial and political interests continue to obstruct efforts to improve the well being of African Americans. Again, they're just nailing it, like dead on, not pulling any punches, not tiptoeing through the tulips whatsoever. A report published by the American Association for Cancer Research in June 2024 highlights stark racial disparities in cancer outcomes. Although African American women have a 6% lower incidence rate of breast cancer compared to white women, they are 40% more likely to die from the disease. Jesus. The Kaiser Family Foundation further reported on October 24th, 2024, that South Carolina ranks among the states with the poorest health outcomes, with severe shortages of healthcare facilities and medical personnel and a high prevalence of chronic illnesses. African Americans in particular face significant barriers to healthcare access, with many lacking health insurance and struggling to obtain quality medical services. Let's see. Jamita Nicole Barlow, a community health psychologist and professor at George Washington University, said that government actions essentially send a clear message to African Americans. Quote, "Who are you to ask for health care?" Yeah. Boarding schools became a living hell for indigenous children. Since the passage of the Civilization Fund Act in 1819, the U.S. government has enacted a series of laws and policies to establish Native American boarding schools nationwide. These institutions forcibly enrolled indigenous children with the explicit aim of erasing their cultural identity and severing ties to their heritage. The boarding school system led to widespread suffering and tragedy. A report released by the United States government in July 2024 acknowledges that from the early 19th century to the 1970s, many Native American students in these schools endured physical and sexual abuse, with at least 973 documented student deaths. However, an independent year-long investigation by the Washington Post uncovered a much higher toll, revealing that between 1828 and 1970, a total of 3,104 students died in those institutions, 3 times the number reported by the government. Judy Gayash-Kabas, executive director of the Nebraska Commission on Indian Affairs, condemned the boarding school system, stating that these were not schools at all, but rather, quote, prison camps and work camps. Rights of Native Americans have been trampled upon. According to an Associated Press report on April 14, 2024, Native Americans are twice as likely as other racial groups to experience violent crimes, including rape and sexual assault. The University of Southern California Center for Health Journalism reported on January 18, 2024, that indigenous communities face severe barriers to accessing healthcare. In Montana, for example, the average life expectancy for Native Americans is 17 years shorter than that of white residents. A Los Angeles Times report from June 17, 2024, highlighted that Native Americans have the highest mortality rates and the lowest life expectancy of any racial group in the United States. disparities that are not attributable to genetic factors. Economic discrimination is also evident. According to an article published by the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis on March 8, 2024, Native American borrowers face higher interest rates when purchasing homes, with loan rates on reservations averaging 1.43 percent points higher than those for white borrowers. Native Americans face low voter participation rates. According uh, to a research published by the Native American Rights Fund on August 13th, 2024, approximately 1 in 4 eligible Native Americans is not registered to vote, and their voter turnout is 16 percentage points lower than that of white voters. This disparity is rooted in a long history of systemic exclusion from the U.S. electoral process. Asian Americans continue to face systemic discrimination in various aspects. A report released by the Alliance for Justice on May 22nd, 2024, highlighted that for much of the 19th and 20th centuries, Asian Americans were systematically excluded from many areas of public life. Even today, 41 state Supreme Courts have never had an Asian American judge, despite some of these states having significant Asian American populations. The report argues that this glaring absence of representation highlights systemic issues that continue to exclude AAPI from key positions in the judiciary, perpetuating a history of disparity and inequity. According to a report by the Harvard Business Review, although Asians are the most educated segment of the American workforce, they are least likely among all racial groups to ascend to leadership roles. However, a detailed analysis of top Fortune 500 technology companies showed that Asian professionals are even less likely to progress in their careers today than they were a decade ago. Although Asians make up around 13% of the U.S. professional workforce, they hold only 1.5% of Fortune 500 corporate officer roles. Additionally, more than half of Fortune 1000 company boards have no Asian directors. Hmm. Yeah, so all that discrimination that like the white people were complaining about, acting like Asian people were being like unfairly put into what do you call it, like just places in education. Wild. The unwarranted exclusion of Chinese Americans leads to tragedy. The China Initiative, implemented by the US government from 2018 to 2022, brought serious troubles to Chinese American scientists, even causing unbearable loss of lives. After a lengthy investigation by the US National Institutes of Health, the NIH, Jane Wu, a Chinese American neuroscientist at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, was barred from applying for further research grants. The investigation destroyed her career. On July 10th, 2024, she took her own life in her Chicago home. Monica M. Bertagnoli, director of the NIH, issued a statement acknowledging that U.S. government actions, quote, have had the unintended consequence of creating a difficult climate for our valued Asian American, Asian immigrant, and Asian research colleagues who may feel targeted and alienated. According to the, quote, 2024 State of Chinese Americans study conducted by the Committee of 100 and National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago, the NORC, about two-thirds of Chinese Americans, or 68%, face at least one form of discrimination in an average month, and 50% report having felt hopeless in the 30 days before taking the survey. Wow. Racial discrimination has evolved and intensified in a report titled, quote, Contemporary Forms of Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance. Ashwini KP, a UN human rights expert, pointed out that a special study of the US law enforcement image database showed that the proportion of people of African descent in the database was disproportionately high, leading to African American individuals being more likely to be mistakenly identified as suspects in facial recognition systems used by US law enforcement. This reflects systemic racial discrimination with deep historical roots. Yeah, I mean that's also always like the common criticism of all the new technological systems, whether it's AI, facial recognition, if you already input and you start with a basis of like racially profiled data, if all your data sets are just based on this racist system of law enforcement to begin with, well, what do you think that's going to get you? Now, section 4, vulnerable groups, helplessness of women and children. The United States has not ratified the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and is the only UN member state that has refused to ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child. A constitutional amendment to quote equal rights for men and women, proposed more than 100 years ago, has yet to be passed. The absence of legal protection has led to widespread infringement of women's and children's rights. Gender discrimination in the workplace has expanded significantly. It's hard for women to break through the professional glass ceiling. According to a report from S&P Global Market Intelligence in 2023, women held just 11.8% of the roughly 15,000 C-suite roles in listed American companies, down from 12.2% the year before. In 2023, the gender wage gap between men and women working full-time widened year over year, according to an annual report from the U.S. Census Bureau. The Census Bureau calculates the gender wage gap by comparing only men and women who work year-round in full-time jobs. But a grimmer picture for women emerges from data that includes part-time workers. Occupational gender segregation is a major cause of the gender wage gap. In 2023, 12% of women in professional and related occupations were employed in the relatively high-paying computer and mathematical and architectural and engineering occupations, compared with 50% of men. Hmm. Even within the same occupations, women earn less on average than men. On average, women with graduate degrees earn less than men with bachelor's degrees. So yeah, 12% versus 50%. Um, and then women with graduate degrees earning less than men with bachelor's degrees is wild. The persistent scourge of sexual violence across multiple sectors remains difficult to eradicate. Sexual harassment remains commonplace in American businesses, with about 40% of working women experiencing such treatment during their careers. Even when reported, it is rarely handled effectively. The rate of sexual harassment experienced by intern doctors is alarmingly high. More than half of all new doctors are subjected to sexual harassment during the first year on the job, researchers say. The FBI has agreed to pay more than 22 million US dollars to settle a class action sexual harassment lawsuit by newly hired women. The lawyer for the case, David J. Schaefer, pointed out that these problems are pervasive within the FBI. According to the Cost of War Project at Brown's University Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs, the number of sexual assaults in the U.S. military in 2023 was 73,695, more than double the official figure. On average, nearly one quarter of active duty women experienced sexual assault during the years of the Afghanistan War from 2001 to 2021. Some individuals accused of sexual misconduct have been nominated to positions within the U.S. government. Gender research experts pointed out that this move made most women facing sexual harassment or assault no longer believe that the judicial system would punish sexual offenders. I mean, they would be right to believe that because that's obviously the case. Domestic violence is on the rise. An average of 24 people every minute become victims of domestic violence at the hands of an intimate partner in the United States. That figure comes from the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Of the nearly 27,000 domestic batteries, 75% involved female victims. Of those women, 65% were black. According to the World Population Review, 11 states in the United States have a domestic violence rate of more than 40% in 2024. However, these figures only represent part of the overall scope of domestic violence in the United States. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, victims of 53% of intimate partner violence and 52% of domestic violence do not report their cases to the police. The department estimates that the actual number of victims of intimate partner violence in 2023 reached about 630,000, while there are more than 1.165 million victims of domestic violence. Women's right to health has been neglected amid political battles. In states where abortion is banned, access to overall health care is restricted, and many obstetricians are leaving their jobs, resulting in the emergence of new quote obstetric care deserts. David Radley, a senior scientist for the Commonwealth Fund's Tracking Health System Performance Initiative, estimated that over 5 million women live in a county that's considered a maternity care desert. The political battles over abortion have led to constant policy reversals, leaving the public in a state of panic, unable to anticipate their own rights. The 2024 Kaiser Family Foundation Women's Health Survey reported that 63% reproductive age women 63% of reproductive age women in the United States are concerned that they or someone close to them would not be able to get an abortion if it was needed to preserve their life or health. There are emerging patterns in multiple states of hospitals delaying or denying standard reproductive care. and of women unwilling to risk going to those hospitals for fear of legal trouble, including possible criminal charges. According to a report by USA Today in September 2024, a woman in Georgia died after failing to get the care she needed because of abortion bans. Another woman in the state, fearing the potential penalties of the current abortion laws, also died as a result of delayed medical care. Quote, "We are in a fearful climate with increased hostility and legal risk for patients, providers, and helpers," said Kelly Baden, Vice President for Public Policy at Guttmacher Institute, a research group that supports access to abortion. Yeah, another fight that the Democrats lost abysmally, and then everyone just kind of moved on and stopped even pretending to hold them accountable for this. The protection of children's right to life and health is inadequate. Every year, the United States recorded more than five infant deaths per 1,000 live births, far exceeding the rates in other high-income countries. A study published by the American Academy of Pediatrics in March 2024 found that nearly 130,000 Chicago children under the age of 6 are exposed to poisonous lead in their household drinking water because of lead pipes. In addition, there are radical disparities in both testing rates and exposure levels, with Black and Latino residents more likely to have lead contaminated water due to lead pipes. The law enforcement and judicial systems have become complicit in the sexual abuse of children. Yeah, I mean, as if the Epstein thing wasn't uh, obvious enough. A Washington Post investigation has found that at least 1,800 state and local law enforcement officers were charged with crimes involving child sexual abuse from 2005 through 2022. Law enforcement agencies across the country have done little to root out child sex offenders within their ranks. The entire justice system is an accomplice to perpetrators. Ineffective background checks allow those convicted of sexual assault to enter the police system. Accused cops have used their knowledge of the legal system to stall cases, get charges lowered, or evade convictions. Prosecutors have given generous plea deals to officers who admitted to raping and groping minors. Judges have allowed many convicted officers to avoid prison time. Even Assistant U.S. Attorney General Kristen Clark admitted that members of law enforcement who have exploited their positions of power have left child victims with, quote, "no recourse and no one else to protect them." Yeah, this is just like horrific stuff. Like, and where are all the like save the children people? Where are all the like anti-pedo people when it's being done by law enforcement? Just as when it's being done by clergy or anybody else that they like. The persecution of young girls is shocking. In the United States, no federal legislation has been passed against flagrant violation of international standards banning child marriage, and child marriage remains, quote, "legal" in the vast majority of states. 86% of child marriages reported in the United States were between adults and minors, most commonly girls aged 16 to 17, but sometimes as young as 12. In addition to physical and emotional abuse, it puts minors at higher risk of poverty and exploitation and denies them educational and economic opportunities. The harmful practice of female genital mutilation, or FGM, remains widespread in the United States. At least 513,000 women and girls are living with or at risk of FGM, and 9 US states and the District of Columbia have no law banning it. I had no idea about this. Like, of those that do have laws banning it, many do not prohibit girls from being taken out of state to be cut. Jesus. Section 5, Fatal Journey. Elegy of Undocumented Immigrants. The humanitarian crisis at the border continues to worsen, with migrants suffering torture and inhumane treatment, and large numbers of migrant children falling victim to exploitation and enslavement. Immigration policies are deeply intertwined with political elections, with politicians openly inciting hatred against immigrants, who have become scapegoats for political parties to shift social tensions. In the process, various human rights are ruthlessly trampled. Yeah, again, I will remind everyone of the tweet from someone who, again, I can't remember. You can just find it on Twitter. Who said, "Remember when the communists said that liberals were not going to let the kids out of the cages, that they were just going to forget, and then that happened." Politicians openly incite hatred against immigrants. False and misleading information about immigrants is widely disseminated. A report by The Guardian on September 18th, 2024 said that racist conspiracy theories about immigrants have dominated the 2024 US election cycle. High-ranking Republicans have doubled down on unsubstantiated rumors about black and brown immigrants. Experts argue that the spread of such different disinformation amplifies existing xenophobic beliefs within the American psyche as a means of political gain. Yeah, obviously. A report from CNN on October 7th, 2024, said that during election campaigns, politicians used disparaging rhetoric against undocumented immigrants, accusing those who commit murder of having, quote, bad genes. Again, that rhetoric is relevant in recent weeks. One-fifth of the residents in Aurora, Colorado were foreign born. During election campaigns, politicians unleashed a world of panic and pain through their threats of mass deportations and family separations against any immigrant, legal or undocumented, who they decide doesn't belong in their America. Politicians have stoked and inflamed anti-immigrant sentiment in the American society. ABC News reported on December 7th, 2024, that in New York City, 3 adults asked 2 immigrant teenagers if they spoke English. When the teens said that they did not, they were attacked, with 1 dead and 1 injured. The humanitarian crisis on the southern border continues. A report in Newsweek on November 25th, 2024, stated that according to U.S. Customs and Border Protection data, the rate at which immigrants die on the border has surged. In the El Paso area of Texas alone, the number of deaths rose from 72 in 2022 to 168 in 2024. The proportion of women and children among the migrant deaths is staggering, with more than 500 women having died there since 2021. Among the migrant children who died, the youngest was only 1 year old. As most deaths occur in remote areas, many remain underreported. Immigrants face torture and inhumane treatment. The United States operates the world's largest immigration detention regime. These facilities not only profit massively, but also shield and tolerate staff members who torture and abuse immigrants. A report released on February 6, 2024, by the Immigration and Refugee Clinical Program at Harvard Law School revealed that solitary confinement is widely used. There were more than 14,000 placements in solitary confinement between 2018 and 2023, and these placements lasted 27 days on average. Almost 30% of solitary confinement placements lasted over 90 days, and 25% of placements lasted over 365 days, causing mental health conditions for those placed in solitary confinement. A report released by a coalition of legal and human rights organizations has revealed that the Louisiana Federal Immigration Detention Center, where thousands of immigrants are being held, distributes filthy drinking water and food contaminated with rat droppings. Some of the detainees were transported to the detention centers from the border, shackled in 5-point restraints for hours, unable to use the restroom or eat and drink, and were left with deep cuts on their wrists and legs. Numerous detainees told of being denied medical care. Quote, "We see these jails almost as black sites in the national immigration system," said Sarah Decker, one of the report's lead authors and an attorney with the advocacy group Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights. A report published by The Guardian on November 20th, 2024, highlighted that a detention center in Baker County, Florida, has been accused of systemic abuse and discrimination. The center, operated by the Baker County Sheriff's Office under contract with the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, allows its staff to routinely racially and sexually harass detainees, deny medical care and sanitary products to women, and then falsify records to cover their tracks. Migrant children are subjected to abuse in shelters. According to a July 18, 2024 report from the Washington Post, incidents of sexual abuse against children in U.S. immigration shelters have been frequent in recent years. The report stated that a supervisor at a shelter in Channelview, Texas, repeatedly raped, abused, and threatened a teenage girl. A youth care worker at an El Paso shelter sexually abused 3 girls aged from 5 to 11 multiple times and threatened to kill their families to silence them. The actual operators of these shelters received over 100 reports of children being sexually harassed or abused, but took no action, failing to investigate or hold anyone accountable, thereby allowing these situations to persist. Again, crickets from the Save the Children, far right nuts, and all the Trumpers, just like they're already just starting to get over the Epstein thing. Hundreds of thousands of migrant children are unaccounted for. After arriving in the United States, migrant children are forcibly separated from their families and detained. Many go missing after being set free, facing exploitation, abuse, forced labor, and even life-threatening dangers. According to a November 27th, 2024 report of BBC News, due to the government releasing unaccompanied migrant children to unvetted sponsors in the United States, over 320,000 unaccompanied minors were lost track of from October 2018 to September 2023. Many of them have been lured into forced labor and sex trafficking, facing abuse, exploitation, and human trafficking. So again, quite literally, the tens of thousands of a year of missing and trafficked children, but being done by the government because of like the way that ICE handles immigration, not being done to like the innocent lily white children that those guys are worried about. The number of illegally employed children migrants has soared. According to a report released in November 2024 by U.S. Senate, there was a disturbing rise in illegal child labor among migrant children, leading to levels of illegal child labor not seen since the early 20th century. Data from the Department of Labor shows that the number of minors involved in undocumented child labor violations, not including the ones that are never reported, increased 472% between 2015 and 2023. A significant number of them are migrant children. In fiscal year 2024, the Labor Department found 4,030 children employed in violation of child labor laws across all industries. Of the 736 cases brought by the department, nearly half involved minors employed in violation of hazardous occupation laws. ABC News reported on December 7th, 2024, that migrant children in the United States are not only employed in agriculture and food supply jobs, but also in dangerous jobs including construction and roofing. However, in face of the surge in child labor, lawmakers have responded by weakening child labor laws and relaxed restrictions to legalize illegal to to legalize, I guess, the illegal act, opening the door to child exploitation, which will legalize illegal acts. According to data from think tank Economics Policy Institute, at least 30 states have introduced or passed bills to weaken child labor protections since 2021. And in 9 of those states, legislation has been introduced to expand youth employment in hazardous occupations or workplaces. In 2024, 11 states have introduced or taken new action on bills to roll back child labor protections. The Washington Post reported that Indiana's new law extends legal work hours for 14 and 15-year-olds, repealing all work hour restrictions for 16 and 17-year-olds. Florida has made law changes to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to work 7 days in a row and also removed all hour restrictions for teens in online school or homeschool, effectively permitting them to work overnight shifts. Hmm, very cool. An Iowa law allows minors in that state to work in jobs previously deemed too hazardous. These laws not only fail to protect children's rights but have instead become tools for quote child exploitation. It is immoral and inappropriate and utterly the wrong decision to roll back child labor law, said Terry Gerstein, director of a labor initiative at New York University. All that weakening and rolling back child labor laws is going to do is create more kids whose fingers and hands, legs are amputated, and who are killed or who are killed on the job. Yeah, we're really going back to like the time of the Upton Sinclair book, The Jungle. So section 6, I believe this is the last one, and then there's a conclusion, and I believe there's a bunch of footnotes too. So, American hegemony, terminator of other countries' human rights. The United States has long pursued hegemony and unilateralism, believing that only it alone can always sit at the table to enjoy the feast, while others can only be at the mercy of its decisions. Only it can always drink the milk, while others are destined to remain the cows that provide it. I do like the metaphors. When they do engage in metaphor here, it's pretty good. With its power politics, Washington has repeatedly trampled on international law and the fundamental norms of global relations, violated human rights in other nations with impunity, and posed a grave threat to global peace, security, and development. The United States has been serving as an accomplice to the genocide in Gaza. Since the outbreak of the latest round of the Israel-Palestine conflict in October 2023, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza has worsened dramatically. According to statistics published on December 31st, 2024, by the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the conflict has resulted in nearly 46,000 Palestinian deaths in Gaza, over 108,000 injuries, and the displacement of 90% of the population in Gaza. Since the outbreak of the conflict, the U.S. government has provided unwavering military and diplomatic support to Israel, repeatedly thwarting international efforts to secure a ceasefire. It has exercised its veto power 7 times to block United Nations Security Council resolutions calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Washington's stance has sparked widespread controversy and discontent across the country. And again, reminding everyone this is all written under Biden's tenure. All of this was before Trump even got into office. Student protests have erupted on dozens of college campuses. only to be met with forceful responses from both university administrations and law enforcement. On February 25th, 2024, a member of the U.S. Air Force set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington to protest against the U.S. administration's support for Israel. On February 23rd, 2024, a group of United Nations human rights experts issued a joint statement, which emphasizes that the International Court of Justice's ruling on January 26, 2024, that there is a plausible risk of genocide in Gaza, underscoring the imperative of an arms embargo on Israel. The experts urged countries to halt arms transfers and military aid to Israel, while the United States remains the largest arms exporters. A report published on August 25th, 2024 by the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft stated that a significant portion of U.S. supplied weaponry has been used in the Israel-Palestine conflict. Another joint statement issued by 32 UN human rights experts pointed out, quote, the transfer of weapons and ammunition to Israel may constitute serious violations of human rights and international humanitarian laws and risk state complicity in international crimes, possibly including genocide. And again, this is all just like, it seems to be the only time when they have to, like, I guess, quote others, and it seems like they're beating around the bush and like equivocating about this stuff, but like pretty obvious that the US is committing the genocide with Israel as its tool. The effective use of unilateral sanctions is fueling humanitarian crises. The United States is overwhelmingly the world's biggest user of unilateral sanctions. It has increasingly imposed them in recent years, negatively affecting the lives of billions across the globe. The Washington Post website reported on July 25, 2024, that the United States had been imposing sanctions at a record-setting pace. As of April 19, 2024, the U.S. government had 15,373 active sanctions in place, far exceeding other countries, with more than 60% of all low-income countries now under some form of financial penalty. The U.S. news website Common Dreams reported on August 12, 2024, that hundreds of legal experts and groups worldwide have jointly stated that the broad use of unilateral sanctions constitutes collective punishment that harms civilian population and violates international law. Overwhelming evidence shows that broad economic sanctions can spark and prolong economic crises, hinder access to essential goods like food, fuel, and medicine, and increase poverty, hunger, disease, and even death rates, especially among children. Yeah, another completely understated thing. Like, no one in US politics talks about these sanctions in anything but the most positive light. I know Citations Needed has done tons of episodes on this. Every major podcast has talked about sanctions, but like, the US is the great Satan to the rest of the world, if not for all its like military operations where they just openly kill people, but the siege warfare it wages on the rest of the world through sanctions, and that it just dresses up in this language of, I don't know, official finance, like the way that it's just like accepted that the U.S. starves people to death. The sanctions and inhumane blockade imposed on Cuba by the United States for more than 6 decades serve as a stark example of a system of unilateral coercive measures. The website of the French monthly Le Monde Diplomatique published an article on October 7, 2024, stating that U.S. sanctions have left Cuba trapped in days and nights marked by poverty, indignity, darkness, and exhaustion. On October 30th, 2024, the United Nations General Assembly overwhelmingly adopted a resolution reiterating its call on the United States to end economic, commercial, and financial embargo against Cuba with an overwhelming favor. On February 8th, 2024, several UN human rights experts issued a joint statement criticizing the U.S. unilateral designation of certain states as sponsors of terrorism, or SST. They argued that such measures negatively affect the, quote, fundamental human rights, including the right to food, right to health, right to education, economic and social rights, right to life, and right to development. Overseas, U.S. military presence harms local communities, according to a report by Okinawa Times on December 24th, 2024. Since the U.S. military's arrival on the islands in 1945, at least 371 cases of sexual violence have been committed by American military personnel, resulting in persistent violations of local residents' dignity and lives. On July 11, 2024, the Asahi Shimbun reported that Okinawa Prefectural Assembly, quote, unanimously adopted a resolution and a statement of protest against the U.S. military and the central government over a series of sex crime cases involving U.S. servicemen stationed here. The Assembly also demanded measures to prevent recurrence and called for revisions to the Japan-U.S. Status of Forces Agreement. Similarly, the Korea Times reported on October 8, 2024, that, quote, the number of crimes committed by U.S. Forces Korea, or USFK, personnel has increased steadily over the past 5 years, sparking widespread public protests. Additionally, the Asahi Shimbun uh, reported on February 7, 2024, that the Okinawa prefectural government has repeatedly urged U.S. military bases to investigate water pollution linked to carcinogenic per and polyfluoroalkyl substances detected near military installations. However, the U.S. military has consistently ignored these requests. The ongoing torture regime at Guantanamo Prison, according to a report by the New York Times on December 18, 2024, detainees at Guantanamo have been imprisoned for approximately 20 years. The prison's torture system persists to this day, with inmates routinely subjected to inhumane abuse. One detainee, Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri, endured various forms of torture, including waterboarding, mock executions, rectal force feeding, and sleep deprivation. He was suspended naked in a basement, confined to a cramped and sealed space where he could only touch the ground on tiptoes, forced into contorted positions until his limbs dislocated, and deprived of sleep for over 10 consecutive days. The Center for Victims of Torture reported on May 15, 2024, that interrogators at Guantanamo employed brutal methods causing, quote, physical and psychological trauma, from which, quote, survivors will never recover or never fully recover. On September 11, 2024, UN human rights experts issued a statement highlighting unresolved issues stemming from U.S. practices, including illegal renditions, torture, inhumane detention conditions, unfair trials by irregular military commissions, arbitrary detention, and other violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law. These practices have undermined justice for victims of terrorism, perpetuating impunity and denying redress. So, yeah. Now, the conclusion. The tumultuous political stage of the United States in 2024 acts as a prism, reflecting the structural dilemmas of American-style human rights. Under the collusion of power and capital, human rights have been distorted into mere props in a political, quote, show, and bargaining chips in a power casino, completely deviating from the core values and fundamental principles of human rights. How to effectively address the genuine needs of the American people and translate the respect for and protection of human rights into tangible actions remains an inescapable challenge for the U.S. government. Yeah. Okay. No, I thought there were going to be like a bunch of footnotes or something. I guess it was just all the reference studies and incidents that they cited at the end there. Went through quite a few, but yeah, there are a bunch of like really small footnotes if you guys want to follow up on the sources. So all these links and everything. Yeah. Again, scathing stuff as always. China just dead on, nails the U.S. perfectly. What can you say? Like, the U.S. is just like dead to rights. What could you possibly say to any of this other than just like point the finger at China and try and accuse them of some kind of made up genocide against weaker people? So, all right, you guys. Well, this will be the reading hour for today. It looked like it worked out to be an hour 8, so decent amount of time anyway. I appreciate you guys joining as always. Glad the chat was popping off. Really good to see you guys.